Hi everyone. Today's lesson is on when to cite your source. And the examples that we'll be using today are primarily related to literature. The tool that we'll be using for this lesson is called EduCanon. And so before we proceed with the lesson, I'd like to say a word or two about how to use it. First of all, let's hope that you are on the right device and in the correct browser. EduCanon works best on laptops or desktops, and it works on tablets if you use Google Chrome. Cell phones are not a good device to use for this tool. So if you're not situated, now would be a good time to exit the lesson and to grab the correct device. If you're okay, let's move forward. This video will pause at various intervals so that you can answer questions. And when it does pause, look for a white wall to slide out on the left side of your screen so that you can see the question. Most of the questions that you'll see in the lesson are multiple choice, and so simply use your mouse to click on the correct answer. One or two of the questions will be short answer. And in those cases, you'll be given a formatting toolbar so that you can type your answer and format it correctly. Once you've chosen an answer or provided an answer, click the thumbs up icon to submit that answer. If you answered a question that was multiple choice, you will receive immediate feedback about whether your answer was correct or not. If you answered a short answer question, you'll have to wait so that I can provide the feedback after I read your answer. Your information is automatically saved, so you don't have to worry about that. When you have read the feedback and you're ready to advance the video, use the arrow key to start the video again, and it will play from the point where it paused. So the question that I just asked you is, what is one fundamental rule about when to cite your sources? And a common answer that students give is that you should cite the source of any information that you get from doing research. That's a generalization that ignores some of the complexities that we will talk about in this lesson. And in fact, you don't actually need to cite everything that comes from a source, although you should probably cite most things that come from a source. That said, what kind of information doesn't need to be cited? The first thing is that you do not need to cite the source of information that would be considered common knowledge. Many students believe that common knowledge refers to the information that they have about the topic, but a better definition of common knowledge would be that it is information that is repeated or can be confirmed in multiple, easily accessible and reliable sources. In other words, it doesn't have to be information that everybody walks around knowing. However, it should be information that a person could go to an online encyclopedia and find the answer to. An example of common knowledge would be the name of the 22nd President of the United States. Now, not many of us walk around knowing who the 22nd President was. However, we could go online and in a few clicks find out the name of that 22nd President. And regardless of the online encyclopedias that we consult, the answer would still be the same. Therefore, that information would qualify as common knowledge, and we would not need to cite the source of it, because in fact, the source is irrelevant. The source could have been any one of 500 sources. Related to that is that if you are working on biographical information about a writer, you also do not need to cite information or source that provides basic facts about a well-known person's life. And some examples of basic facts would be where a writer was born, or when the writer was born, or the names of the writer's parents. that kind of information can be easily confirmed in various sources. So you do not need to cite the source of that information. So if we're clear about what information constitutes common knowledge, then what we should talk about next is what information does need to be cited. If we don't need to cite common knowledge, what do we cite? Number one, I think we should start with the basics and the easy. And the easiest thing is that if you quote something, you should tell your reader the source of that quotation. Therefore, provide a citation for any words that you include in your paper word for word from a source. Below is an excerpt from Kara Walker's review of Toni Morrison's novel, God Help the Child. And you can read what Walker wrote in the blue font. Underneath the excerpt are 3 examples of how you might include information from that review in your own essay. Now, in the first example, the student has chosen to just include a few words from that review. And she or he has also decided not to mention Kara Walker's name within the sentence. Therefore, we would put quotation marks around those few words that we copied from the review, and then after the quotation marks, we would indicate who wrote those words. Because this was an online source, we have no page numbers to report, but we can tell our readers that it came from Kara Walker. In the second example, the student has decided to write a complete sentence from the review, and this time he or she has included Kara Walker's name in the signal phrase before that quotation. In the third example, the student has decided to paraphrase from the review and to put those ideas into her own words. The point is that whether you use a direct quotation or whether you copy someone's ideas very closely in a paraphrase, you still need to cite the source of the information. And absolutely, if you use quotations, you must tell your reader the source of those quotations. The second point is that when you present number facts, such as statistics or results of a poll or a survey, you should also tell the reader the source of that information. Because the point is that could not be common knowledge. Most of us do not walk around knowing specific numbers for information. So whether you use those statistics word for word or whether you paraphrase them, you still need to let your reader know the source of the specific numbers. Now, when you present general numbers, you may not need to cite the source. So, for example, if you were writing about wage disparity by gender, you might make the general statement that, generally speaking, women earn less than men for doing the same work. And that's general enough that it might qualify as common knowledge. We've read that a lot, we've heard it a lot, and it's not very specific. And you knew it before you started writing your paper. However, that kind of general information sometimes is not helpful, and you might want to be more specific. In that case, you would go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and you would find the exact salary disparity. And then you might say that women earn 78 cents for every dollar earned by a man who does the same job. On your screen, you can see an example of the general versus the specific related to the number of copies of Moby Dick that were sold while Herman Melville was still alive. And when we speak about that very generally, this is information that can be found in any of his biographies, that even though you can hardly get out of college without reading Moby Dick, it wasn't such a popular novel at the time that Melville wrote it. We would not need to cite that first sentence because it's very general. However, if we had specific numbers, we knew the specific number of copies that were sold during Melville's lifetime, we might want to point the reader to the source of that information, because a reader might want to confirm that information. So we've talked about citing quotations, and we've talked about citing numbers. The third point is that you should cite any expert opinion or interpretation that comes from a secondary source. In other words, your own opinion about a text or about a writer and your own interpretation of a text doesn't need to be cited. However, when you present someone else's opinion and their way of seeing a novel or a short story or a poem or a play, you should provide citation information for that. Here are some examples of opinions that might slip in that you might not think of as opinions right away. One kind of opinion that we sometimes see in a biography is something very flattering about the writer. And so in this case, Holloway has said that Flannery O'Connor is the first great modern writer from the South. Well, certainly not everyone would agree with that statement. And so because it's her opinion and someone else would have a different opinion, it's not something that we can prove. There is no yardstick for it. We would want to cite the source of that information. And we can cite the source either within the sentence or we can cite it in parentheses at the end of the sentence. Another kind of opinion that you might run across is when someone who writes a biography tries to explain the reason why a writer did something. For example, someone might say that James Baldwin began writing to escape the boredom of his home life. Well, unless that person, we can't claim that information. James Baldwin didn't say that to us. We didn't ask him firsthand. So we need to say that we're not responsible for making that causal relationship, that someone else has done that. And we need to present the name of the person who did. And then lastly, an interpretation of the text. And you'll see 3 examples of that here in the middle of your screen. And the first one, in which we quote a sentence and we mention the writers within the sentence, is an example of presenting their interpretation. Or we can paraphrase that, as in the last example in that middle section. There are many ways we can present it, but we don't want to claim that interpretation as ours if it was not. So always cite the source. Lastly, and number 4, you want to cite information that only appears in 1 or 2 sources. First, you want to make sure that the information is accurate, but then you want to cite the source. Secondly, you want to cite information that's controversial or that people would disagree about. And third, you want to cite any facts that would surprise readers. If they would become skeptical about the information, we want to be able to point them to the source. So here are 3 kinds of sources that we would need to identify in the paper. The first is when we're citing information that has not been widely reported, but we believe it to be true. It's not a question of veracity. It's just that not many people mentioned it. So a statement that Georgia writers Alice Walker and Flannery O'Connor lived minutes away from each other makes sense. We know that they lived in the state of Georgia. We could go to Google Maps and find out that it certainly looks like it's minutes away. However, because it's not reported in a variety of sources, we might want to just steer our readers to the source. Secondly, if there's information where reasonable people disagree, we want to write about that disagreement. And so a good example is Edgar Allan Poe. He died in such a mysterious way that many people, even today, try to figure out what was his actual cause of death. His death certificate says one thing, but that hasn't satisfied a lot of historians and literary critics and people who love his literature. So if you do research on Poe's cause of death, you'll find that there's a group of people who believe that he died from brain swelling as a result of a fight that he was involved in. But we don't want to present that as actual fact because it hasn't been proven yet. So instead, we would say there is disagreement about the cause of Poe's death, and some people believe that he died from brain swelling. And in parentheses, we would cite a source for a group of people or a person who believes that. Lastly, if your readers would be surprised by the information that you're presenting, maybe they know some of it, but there's one part of it that would be new to them, then you want to cite your source. So many Terry McMillan fans might know that her novel, How Stella Got Her Groove Back, was inspired by a trip that she took to Jamaica, during which she met the man that she later married and then even later divorced. And he was a very young man, about half her age. Most people know that, and some people have even seen the movie that was made of that novel. But your readers might not know that originally that novel was a poem that she wrote for Jonathan Plummer. And then she developed that poem into the novel that we're familiar with today. Your readers might be skeptical about that, a poem that turned into a novel, so you want to cite the source of any information that your readers would question. Okay, so let's recap. Always cite the source when you present someone else's interpretation or opinion. And you have to look really closely because sometimes an opinion will be presented as a fact. But if you think about it and you find it to be an opinion, always cite the source of that. Cite the source of any information that you copy word for word. Also cite the source of information that appears in only one or two sources. And first you want to make sure that the information is accurate, and then you want to lead your readers to the source. Always cite the source of number facts, such as statistics or the results of polls, surveys, and experiments. And lastly, you want to identify the source of information that would surprise your reader or that would be considered controversial, where groups of people disagree about it. Any information that's in dispute should be cited. However, don't cite information that is agreed upon by scholars and that your readers can easily and quickly find it with a few keystrokes on the keyboard. So if it's located in multiple reliable sources, you don't need to cite the information. Essentially, what we're saying is try to give your readers the source of the information that you found, and don't give your readers a reason to wonder where your information is. That's it for this lesson. Next time, you'll learn about how to cite the sources now that you understand when to cite them. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.